welcome back. What are the greatest challenges to cybersecurity, and how do we respond? What will it take to have an effective response? We're going to have a discussion on stage, and I invite you to keep sending questions. I'm getting quite a lot, but keep sending them. And we're going to invite back our guests from first the National Cybersecurity Center, Kieran Martin, and then from ANSSI, Mr. Guillaume Popard. Please give them a warm welcome back. And then we're going to have a Norwegian representative, expert on cybersecurity. He is Director of Technology at NSM. Please give a warm welcome to Hans Robert Bjørnås.
Thank you.
And we've heard now from the gentleman about the situation in the UK and in France. And if we turn to Norway, Hans, what do you see as the main challenges?
Well, I'm quite afraid that the story is not much unlike the stories told by neither of the two keynote speakers. If I should try to give a twist on the whole thing, the only difference I can come up with is that we very often see that people don't know their true layout or architecture of their systems. And why is that? Well, one, because there is aspects of the human nature, I guess, that are there to do a job. They want to do that job effectively. If they are able to bypass bureaucratic processes to get the job done, they do so. Not with bad intentions, but they do it to get the job done effectively. And sometimes these modifications or adjustments, shortcuts they do, are not removed afterwards. So the story we are told on how the system is built is not always what we find when we go out there testing them. And that is perhaps the only difference or the only thing I can add to the story that were told by Guillaume and Kieran.
So why is that? Are Norwegians not too fond of bureaucracy and then procedures? We try to take the shortcuts?
It might be elements of that, but I think it's in the human nature to do things like that. And if you are not very strict on documenting what we're actually doing, well, it's a human error to forget things. Mm. And then we are in that situation that the map does not actually depict the actual terrain out there.
Mm. And then we have infrastructure that all the new developments depend on. And that infrastructure will frequently be older than the hackers you discussed, Kieran. What does that mean? The existing infrastructure, how good and robust is that here?
Well, the legacy is also a factor that complicates the whole thing. We're not necessarily in a situation where the legacy that are included or implemented in modern systems have the necessary robustness. There are infrastructure that is not updated, not patched, or not patchable at all, because there is such a long lifespan. The investments have been so huge, it has to be brought forward over time, and we then end up with vulnerabilities caused by these when they are included in networks that has outbreaks to internet, for example. Mm.
And Norway is one of the most digitalized countries in the world. And are we too speedy? Are we moving too fast?
There is a big appetite for taking on new technology in Norway. And it's not always that we take the time, I guess, to think through and be wise on how to implement and what we implement in our systems. We are more fond of grabbing the chance when the chance is there, rather than thinking about more or less the security aspect then of the whole thing. So that is a challenge.
So this description from Norway, does it sound familiar to what you are seeing in your countries?
Looks very familiar. I would like to answer to your last question. Does it go too fast? The mission of people who do cyber, who do security in general, in my opinion, is not to explain people that they are going too fast. Our mission is to help them to go fast but safely. And it's possible to do it. But we first have to remove what is not necessary. I often talk with companies, for example, they tell me, okay, we are going to do modern things, we are going to do blockchain. I say, okay, you are going to do, but to do what? Well, they don't know. They just know that blockchain is, well, it's nice, it's modern, they don't know what it is. And that's not just a few people who really know what is a blockchain in practice. Some of them, they just want to go in the cloud. Maybe it's already an old story, but why going in the cloud? That's not so clear. To save money most of the time and to obtain more capacities. But what we explain in such situation is that, okay, no, you cannot just do things just because you have met companies that are very clever to explain that their solutions are the good ones. You must remain the people who decide what you want to do. You must do your own threat analysis. You must handle, you must make your own choice. It is your responsibility to do it. And if you do it, it doesn't take so much time. It enables on the long term to save money also. But if you keep on mastering your own system, what are the sensitive information, what are the less sensitive ones, and so on, then you can use many things and you can go very fast. As fast probably as the other ones.
What is the key question we should ask if we want to do blockchain or we want to go into the cloud? What is the first question we should ask ourselves?
The question is the risk management. What is your risk analysis? And when you ask this question, most of the time people, okay, they understand that they missed something, probably. Because, at least for the big companies, they are used to do risk management in many, many domains, legal, physical security, consumer relations, so on, many, many things. Cyber today, in most of the cases, at least in France, cyber is not in the risk management organization, it is a kind of ad hoc organization, very tricky, special, sometimes directly related to the CEO because we don't know where to put it, sometimes very low into the organization. So the first question is, okay, what is your risk analysis? How do you handle, how do you manage this new risk? It is a new risk, but it's not a different risk. So when we normalize, when we take this new risk as another one, it helps the company to use usual way to handle such kind of situations and to make the good choices. And after it's a matter of expertise, it's a matter of budget and so on, but we have to do it in the right order.
And Kieran, would you like to comment on the description of Norway's situation?
Well, as Guillaume has said, it's a very familiar story. It's one we recognize. I think that all developed countries struggle with legacy IT that was built without security in mind. And I think that building on what Norwegian colleagues have said, I mean, I think there are two important points which Guillaume has already dealt with, but perhaps I could amplify. One is, I entirely agree about the pace point of digitalization, and I think this goes to the whole heart of the philosophy of why we do cybersecurity. Telling people to slow down in the 21st century doesn't work. It's impossible. If you slow down, then you will self-harm because no one else will. And we have a direct example from the UK, quite painful experience in government about doing just that. In the early part of this decade, around 2010, 2011, there was a very imaginative and successful initiative to transform government digital services, both the IT in the hands of the individual civil servants, but also people's experience of online tax and online encounters with the government. And our predecessors in government security said, this all sounds very, very risky and very dangerous, and you should slow down. What happened? There was a split. Government couldn't afford to slow down. We didn't have the money. Citizens had the expectation that they should, if they can buy shopping online, they should be able to do tax online and so forth. So the security concerns were marginalized, and that damaged national security, and that damaged national cybersecurity. So we had to get with it, and we had to say, no, stop treating security as the paramount concern, and start doing a proper risk analysis to make government services safe enough, measure it with the risk they face so that they can operate safely. That's one thing. The second thing then is about new technologies. The first thing I'll say about new technologies, blockchain, etc., is from a cybersecurity point of view, can we fix some of the stuff I was talking about earlier, which goes back to the last century, before we get too carried away with blockchain and so forth? And the second thing is I'd go even further than Guillaume and say, if people say, I'm getting into blockchain, you don't get into blockchain, you don't get into artificial intelligence, you get into something which is enabled, or blockchain or AI as part of the business model. And there's a danger at the minute, and it's a danger in cybersecurity as much as everything else, where, people for economic reasons will try to create bubbles, and they'll say, so even in government, when spending rounds come, people say, well, we need to do artificial intelligence. I always ask them, what do you mean? What are you actually trying to do? There's a great professor who used to be at Harvard who always said, when people said to him, I want to talk to you about artificial intelligence, he said, oh, you mean sums? Let's actually talk about what do we mean by, what are we trying to do? Because otherwise we get carried away in a bubble of hype, and you can't do proper digital improvement, but you certainly can't do security if you don't understand what you're doing.
I had one expert telling me he disliked so much the term AI, and he said we should call it computer science.
Yes, or mathematics.
Or mathematics. You agree?
Yeah.
Yes. But we have an ongoing incident as we speak now in Norway. We have the company Hydro under attack, ransomware, and NSM is working on that. But there is also international cooperation. When there is that kind of attack, what does Norway do to include the resources of other countries?
Well, when I met Guillaume and Kieran this morning, the first thing I asked was, are you aware of the ongoing situation? And they both could confirm on directors level that they were informed. So the system works. There is a relation across countries. The global perspective that Kieran alluded to is actually there to some extent. So our search has actually gone out there, done its call out. We are in this situation. Are there any other out there experiencing the same thing? Our first indicators are these. Have you anything on these issues out there right now? This helps us out when it comes to our own analysis of the situation. So that is the biggest thing. There is a relation across countries that are being exploited when situations occur. And we have also reached out to France, as Guillaume pointed out. They had something similar going on just the previous month or something. And these are the way we actually do business across countries, as one aspect of the things Kieran pointed out.
And when private business is attacked in this way, what role can and should the government agencies play?
I do not separate public and private. For me, there are some critical infrastructures, some people that are important for our nation, and honestly, for me, if they are private or public, it doesn't make a real difference. And for the attackers, it also doesn't make a real difference. So we should not focus on this. We should focus on the impact it can have on the global security of our nation and on the priority it can have for national security, of course, but also for the economical impact. Because we know that some of the victims are very sensitive, but others are not from a defense and security point of view. But when you talk about one of the greatest company with the most important budget, so on, well, if they are attacked, it has some impact for our citizens. So, well, we have to avoid separations, too clear separation. And I often say that we want to keep a kind of freedom to decide where we can put our experts, what are the priorities, and so on.
I would concur. I think when we were setting up the National Cybersecurity Centre, there were various debates around what's the balance of risk between government and the private sector. And eventually, I think I called time on this debate on the grounds that we would do nothing else if we tried to say, in the case of, say, energy, what risk does the government own and what does a private company called the National Grid own? If the National Grid is attacked, the answer is both. The only nuance I would put on that is that, again, if you go back to the Chinese state attack on major companies that we were talking about, if, for example, a small company that isn't strategically significant gets targeted by a nation state, which sometimes happens, it's not reasonable for them to be expected to be able to contend with that. They're entitled to government help. However, if a major company gets attacked by something that isn't, that they should be able to defend against, I think we need to help them because we need to manage the impact. But over time, I would hope that mechanisms such as cyber insurance, better corporate governance, more canny, if you like, and astute regulation will incentivize companies to take better care of themselves from the array of basic threats that cause too much harm.
We have lots of questions coming in now, and one is, what do you see as the biggest threat? Is it criminals or is it states, the biggest threat?
It is states doing sabotage. The big actors having very big impact on our critical infrastructures. This is our nightmare, at least in France. We need to prepare against this because we know that the future conflicts will include a huge part of digital war. And because of the effects that can be obtained, because of the cost, which is not so important, we cannot compare, for example, the cost of nuclear deterrence and the cost of cyber attacks. It's totally, totally different. With a few hundred skilled people, you can build your own cyber army. This is the main difficulty we have. And with cyber, of course, the people who attack us, they know that they can do it officially. Usually they don't. But they can also do it. And just after saying, OK, it's not us, or give us the proofs. And this is the situation where we are today. So we really need to prevent an escalation of conflicts in the cyberspace, in the digital world, because the impacts will not be digital. The impacts will be real. We talk about real things and real impacts on our nations and our citizens.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Kieran, one of your job is actually also to find out who is behind the attack. What do you see? What do you think is the main aggressor here? Is it states or is it criminals? Is it...
In terms of, we care mostly about impact. So if you're interested in impact and harm, then it's a bit like comparing, as the English say, comparing apples and pears. So there is the big state threat, the disruptive, the national catastrophe threat that Guillaume has warned about. That's on our minds. But how do you compare that against the long-term atrophying of the digital economy, because it's consistently undermined by millions and billions of small-scale criminal attacks that just turn people away from online activity? What they both have in common is weak cybersecurity and a weak digital infrastructure. So my sort of turning around the question is the biggest threat to cybersecurity is weak cybersecurity.
Let's take a couple of questions from the audience now. And what do you think will be the biggest game-changing technology from a security point of view in the next 10 years?
Thank you. One saying springs to mind, and that is a good question. You know then that the answer is much less brilliant. Well, even though we said that artificial intelligence was not a phrase we should use, I think that is one of the aspects that is both the enabler and the potential threat in the future. Using it in a protective security dimension is something we will have to look into and start looking into. but it's definitely also one of the aspects that could challenge us in the future. Guillaume made some remarks on that aspect. It can be turned against us, against our will as well. So these are aspects that I think it's necessary to address in the future.
Yeah. And then when we come to cryptography, we have the rise or the advent of quantum computers, and some think that may be the end to looking at cryptography as sort of securing our secrets. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to crypto, but just for the previous question, the main changes are not technical. And it's difficult for me to say this. I'm an engineer. I prefer talking about techniques, but what I observe is that the main changes are rather on the organization, the way we deal with cyber, and with the governance of all this and so on. The other thing is that the model of IT systems is changing quite quickly. And the usual way we protect systems is no longer efficient, because the assumption is that every entity, every company has its own IT system. It's no longer true. We know it with cloud and evolution of cloud and so on. So we have to transform our security strategy, even from a technical point of view. We have to develop our trust model in order to be able to also catch this new development of IT. Otherwise, we will explain people how to secure systems of the last century, and it will not be efficient.
What about the quantum computers?
For the quantum computers, a long time ago, the question was, okay, can it work? And now we have an answer. The answer is yes. So we will have quantum computers. What is the interest of quantum computers? Okay, some people will have a much more detailed answer than me, but in all what I see, the only interest of quantum computer is breaking crypto. So it explains who is paying for developing quantum computers today.
Do you think crypto will survive?
So crypto will have to evolve. The first thing is that quantum computers cannot break all the crypto schemes. It's a bit surprising, but the old-fashioned crypto is not really frightened by quantum computers. What we call symmetric crypto. You have a key, you encrypt, and people receive encrypted data, they decrypt with the same key. Okay, this kind of crypto, old-style crypto, which is already an important part of existing crypto, is not broken by quantum computers. We can go into details, but from a high level, there's no real impact. Or maybe we have to double the length of the keys, but it's not a real impact. We have a real problem with public key crypto, so-called public key crypto, which is probably totally broken. Existing schemes will be totally broken by quantum computer. So we need to prepare so-called post-quantum algorithms. I've been working on this for many years. The agencies now are working. I have crypto experts in the agency, in ANSI, who are working on this. Standardization is working on this at different levels for sensitive applications like military application. In NATO, for example, we talk a lot about post-quantum cryptography. And the question will be, okay, we are going to define new standards, and how can we change existing standards with new ones? We know that in practice, this is very difficult to do, but the good news is that we have time to do it. We have years, 10 years, 20 years, I don't know, at least 10 years to do it. And so there's many things to do, but we are on time, and we will do it. Well.
We'll hear more about quantum computers and crypto in the conference tomorrow. But I'd like now to take a few questions from the audience and make the answers very brief so we can get through some of these. And first, how important is standards and open source to cybersecurity? How important is standards and open source to cybersecurity?
hugely important. Both are hugely important. If I say the biggest threat to cybersecurity is weak cybersecurity, then standards are a critical part of raising that. Open source, we're declassifying more than we've ever done. Our ability to help other partners and their ability to help us is aided enormously by the fact that it's much easier to share information than national security organizations have traditionally found. So that is absolutely vital. Many of our major breakthroughs have come from industry.
Guillaume, are the certs in France centralized? And any reflections on the Norwegian model with the national cert combined with sector cert? First, are you centralized?
The certs cannot be centralized. The DNA of certs is to work in networks. But I consider that national certs, like NorCert or CertFR in France, hosted by ANSSI, they have a key role to play to organize and to help this community to work together.
Great. Who are the attackers? How do they finance their operations?
Could you repeat the last part, please?
Who are the attackers you see in cyber, and how do they finance their operations?
Well, we are not overly focused on who the attacker is. There are other services in Norway that have that as their responsibility. So in that sense, I'm not going to answer that any further. But financing is elements that we have touched upon already. State-financed, criminality. There are a lot of aspects to finance such a endeavor.
Kieran, you talked about shutting down the phishing sites. What if the sites are abroad? Can you still do that?
Yeah, very often, if you provide somebody with robust, credible technical evidence anywhere in the world that they're hosting a malicious site, and you ask them, having presented them with the evidence to take it down, they very often will.
And the hot potato, Huawei. You have experience with Huawei in the UK, and you're also monitoring how they work there. How is it working?
Is that the time? We have a formal process where every year we review and publish Huawei's security record in the UK because of the concerns that have been raised about them. They've been in the UK since 2003. We've had the formal report. We've had formal assessments for 10 years and a formal annual report for 5. Last year's report showed some very serious difficulties with some of the standards of cybersecurity in the UK's networks, and the company have said they're putting in place a plan to address those. I stress that those are engineering and security practice defects. They are not evidence of malicious activity from the government of China. So we've said very clearly that we will hold them to account for that. And I think that shows the importance of the standards agenda, of the raising cybersecurity standards agenda. Okay.
We're going to finish off there just with the best advice from each one of you to a person interested in securing his business, her business, or agency. What is the best short advice you can give, Hans?
Know your system and your values and how to protect them.
Understand what you care about and how to protect it.
Include cyber risk in risk management.
Cyber risk,
cyber risk into the risk management,
into the risk
usual
management.
one, the classical one.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming and sharing experience and views, gentlemen.